Hey guys, tonight you're walking through a medieval town where smiling is forbidden by law. The streets are silent. The church bells never seem to stop ringing, and every face you pass looks cold enough to freeze the candlelight itself. Some say the ban began after a terrible winter feast. Others swear something still wanders beneath the old keep, listening for laughter in the dark. So, before you settle in beside the fire tonight, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy these quiet medieval journeys. And let me know your location and local time in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's step into the medieval town where nobody was allowed to smile. Hey guys! Tonight you find yourself trudging through a ribbon of muddy road beneath the fading grey light of evening, with cold river mist sliding over your boots and damp wind tugging at the edges of your cloak. Ahead, beyond the bare winter trees, rises a small medieval town wrapped in stone walls the colour of wet ash. Smoke drifts from crooked chimneys. Somewhere inside, a bell tolls low and slow, like an old monk reminding the world that time is forever leaking away whether people are ready or not. Your shoulders ache from travel. Straw still clings to your sleeves from the last barn where you slept. The horse you rented earlier today wisely abandoned any emotional attachment to you sometime around noon. Medieval travel brochures really oversold this experience. They speak of glorious roads and bustling inns. They rarely mention frozen toes, suspicious chickens, or the very real possibility of sharing a bed with a man named Ulrich who snores like a collapsing monastery roof. And honestly, you probably would not last a week out here. Your modern knees alone would file formal complaints by sunrise. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you settle in tonight, feel free to comment your location and local time as well. It is always comforting to imagine little points of candlelight scattered across the dark. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The town waits ahead beside the river, quiet except for the distant barking of dogs and the clatter of chains against the gatehouse wall. You pull your wool cloak tighter and continue along the road, boots sinking softly into ruts left by wagons earlier in the day. The smell of wood smoke thickens as you approach. Beneath it lingers the scent of damp hay, horse sweat, fish brine from the river docks, and the faint sour trace of old ale soaked deep into timber. A line of travellers inches toward the gate. Two merchants with fur-lined caps argue quietly over toll fees. A widow carrying geese mutters prayers beneath her breath. A monk stands motionless beside the roadside shrine of St. Odric, whose weather-worn face has nearly vanished beneath wax drippings and years of rain. No one smiles. At first you barely notice it. Medieval life is difficult, after all. People rarely grin while dragging barrels through freezing mud. Yet as you draw nearer, the strangeness settles over you like cold fog. Faces remain stiff even during conversation. The merchants argue without amusement. The widow scolds her geese with complete solemnity. Even a little boy chasing a hoop through the muck stops abruptly when his mother catches him beginning to laugh. She grips his shoulder at once. Hard. The child lowers his eyes immediately. You slow your steps. Some swear that the town has always been this way. Others insist the law came later, after some forgotten disaster no one now describes quite the same way twice. Even now, it is hard to tell whether the stories began as warnings, punishments, or merely frightened guesses repeated too many times beside winter fires. Ahead, torchlight flickers along the gatehouse arch. Two guards wrapped in thick wool cloaks stand beneath iron hooks blackened by rain. Their spears look heavy enough to discourage enthusiasm on principle alone. One of them raises a hand. Halt. You do, mostly because medieval guards tend to react poorly when people continue walking after being told not to. The older guard studies you carefully. His beard is streaked with grey, and his nose looks as though it lost an argument with a mace several decades ago. Name, he says. You give one. Trade. Traveller. The younger guard snorts softly at that, though even his amusement stops before reaching his mouth. The older man scratches into a wax tablet with a small iron stylus. Around his belt hangs a ring of heavy keys that clink each time he shifts. Behind him the gatehouse smells of wet leather, smoke, and rushes beginning to rot across the stone floor. You carry weapons. A knife. Everyone carries a knife. Reasonable point, honestly. The guard nods toward the archway but does not yet let you pass. Instead he leans slightly closer. You know the custom here. You hesitate. No. The younger guard glances away uneasily. Somewhere overhead, chains creak as the portcullis sways in the wind. The older man lowers his voice. You do not smile inside the walls. You blink once, uncertain whether he speaks literally or whether this is some local joke delivered with remarkable commitment. His face remains entirely still. No smiling, you ask carefully. No smiling, he repeats. The widow with the geese lowers her eyes immediately. The merchants suddenly become very interested in their boots. You look from one face to another, waiting for someone to break into laughter. No one does. A gust of cold air pushes smoke beneath the gate arch. The torch beside you spits resin onto the stones. Why, you finally ask. The guard shrugs. Law of the town. That seems difficult. It is easier than the alternative. Helpful clarification there. The younger guard quietly makes a sign against bad luck by touching 2 fingers to the iron buckle near his throat. Many folk believe iron turns aside wicked spirits. Some nail horseshoes above doors. Others sleep with iron keys beneath pillows to keep nightmares from sitting on their chests at night. No one can quite agree whether such charms work, though people continue using them with determined enthusiasm anyway. You glance again toward the town beyond the gate. Narrow lanes disappear between leaning timber houses. Candlelight glows behind shutters. Somewhere farther inside, another bell begins ringing from what sounds like a monastery tower. The older guard finally steps aside. You may enter. Keep your face respectful. The reeve dislikes trouble. And if someone smiles accidentally, the younger guard answers this time. Best not to. Not especially comforting. You duck beneath the gate arch and enter the town. Immediately the sounds change. Outside the walls the world carried open wind and river noise. Inside, everything narrows into softer echoes, footsteps on wet stones, distant murmurs, the creak of signs swinging overhead. Water to drip steadily from roof edges into shallow gutters running beside the lanes. The streets are crowded despite the late hour. Bakers carry empty trays home beneath wool blankets. Apprentices haul buckets from wells. A woman shakes, rushes onto her floor through an open doorway while muttering about rats large enough to demand rent. Still no smiles. You pass a fishmonger closing his stall. He weighs coins carefully beneath lantern light. Nearby, 2 old men play a board game with carved bone pieces outside an alehouse. One appears to win. The other merely nods once as if acknowledging the inevitability of winter itself. No triumph, no grin. The silence around the custom presses against your thoughts more heavily than any shouted warning could have done. A dog trots from an alley carrying half a sausage in its mouth. For one hopeful moment the animal looks delighted with life itself. Then its owner snaps sharply, and even the dog lowers its tail. That feels excessive. You continue deeper through the winding lanes while cold mist curls around your boots. Overhead, laundry stiffens in the freezing air between upper windows. Beeswax candles flicker behind shutters. The smell of cabbage pottage drifts from somewhere nearby, thick and comforting despite everything. Ahead, the square opens slowly before you beneath the shadow of a dark church tower. And there, standing at the center beside the frozen fountain, you finally see the wooden sign nailed into the post for all newcomers to read. By order of the town council, let no man, woman, or child display laughter within these walls. Below the words hangs a smaller line faded by rain and age. For the safety of all souls. The bell overhead tolls again. Slow, heavy, and somewhere behind you, hidden in the foggy streets, someone almost laughs before stopping themselves at once. The bell continues tolling above the square while cold mist drifts around the frozen fountain and settles into the folds of your cloak. No one lingers long beneath the warning sign. Townsfolk pass with lowered heads and careful expressions, boots scraping softly across damp stones polished by generations of rain, mud, and weary feet. You stand there another moment anyway, because your brain is still trying to decide whether this entire town is deeply cursed or simply very committed to local regulations. A cartwheel rattles somewhere beyond the church. Shutters close overhead. The smell of onions frying in the old fat drifts from an alley beside a cooper's shop, and for one brief instant the ordinary comfort of it all almost makes the strange law feel less threatening. Then a woman nearby hushes her husband for smiling at their child, and the feeling returns immediately. The older gate guard appears beside you again without warning, which in medieval towns is apparently considered normal social behavior. You still need lodging, he asks. You nod. Inn near the river takes travellers, if they have space. He shrugs beneath his damp wool cloak. Pilgrims came through yesterday. Half the Abbey Road is flooded north of here. Naturally. The guard gestures for you to follow. Together you cross the square beneath hanging lanterns that sway gently in the wind. Around the church steps, beggars huddle beneath patched blankets while a thin priest distributes coarse bread from a wicker basket. No one speaks loudly. Even the horses tied beside the trough seem subdued, steaming quietly in the cold. The guard notices your glances. You grow used to it. To what? The silence. A pair of apprentices hurry past carrying bundles of rushes for floor coverings. One slips slightly on the wet stones. His companion catches him by the arm, and for half a heartbeat both nearly laugh from surprise. The older apprentice immediately whispers a prayer. Not exaggerated either, a genuine prayer. You lower your voice. Do people truly fear smiling that much? The guard walks a few paces before answering. Fear keeps towns alive. That sounds suspiciously like something repeated so often nobody remembers what it originally meant. The streets narrow as you descend toward the river quarter. Timber houses lean over the lane like tired old men listening for gossip. Candlelight leaks through warped shutters. Water trickles beneath little plank bridges crossing drainage gutters. Somewhere nearby, unseen geese complain bitterly about existence. A perfectly reasonable opinion for geese to hold. The guard leads you beneath an archway painted long ago with saints whose faces have mostly flaked away. Beyond it stands the gatehouse proper, a squat stone building beside the inner wall where watchmen record tolls, disputes, fines, and apparently dangerous outbreaks of cheerfulness. You wait here, the guard says. Inside, warmth hits you first. Not pleasant warmth exactly. More the dense, smoky heat produced by too many damp cloaks drying near one fire. The chamber smells of wet wool, onions, old parchment, tallow smoke, and humanity in all its determined medieval persistence. Rushes cover the floor, though many have darkened into a suspicious texture best left uninvestigated. A long oak table stands beneath hanging lanterns. 3 watchmen sit there drinking weak ale from clay cups while a clerk scratches into a thick ledger with an ink-blackened quill. He looks up as you enter. Another traveller waits near the hearth, a broad merchant wrapped in fur, his boots steaming beside the fire. He nods politely but does not smile. Of course he does not. The older guard removes his gloves finger by finger and addresses the clerk. "Name him." The clerk dips his quill. "You repeat your name again." Medieval travel involves an astonishing amount of administrative repetition, considering most roads are technically puddles connected by regret. The clerk asks your trade, birthplace, reason for travel, intended stay, and whether you carry contagious illness. You consider mentioning your current confusion but decide against it. At last he turns several pages backward in the ledger. You glimpse rows of cramped writing beside little symbols inked into the margins. Some pages bear crosses. Others bear circles. One has what appears to be a tiny frowning face, which feels unnecessarily committed to the theme. The clerk notices your curiosity and quietly closes the book. "Town records," he says. "What sort?" "Incidents." The merchant near the fire shifts uneasily at the word. No one elaborates. Outside, wind rattles the shutters. A watchman stirs the fire with an iron poker while another carefully trims a beeswax candle using a small knife. Beeswax candles burn cleaner than cheap tallow ones, though only monasteries and wealthy households can usually afford many of them. The poorer sort smoke terribly and smell faintly like old soup. A kettle hangs above the hearth. Something herbal simmers inside. The clerk catches you looking. "Willow bark," he says, "for headaches." Does it work? Sometimes. That you quickly learn describes most medieval medicine. Leeches sometimes work. Honey sometimes works. Garlic sometimes works. Prayers sometimes work. And occasionally someone survives despite all efforts in either direction. The merchant finally speaks. "You're new here." You nod. "Then listen carefully," he says quietly. "Do not grin, not in jest, not from drink, not even by accident." The younger watchman chuckles softly at that last part before immediately clearing his throat and staring into his cup as though he has personally disappointed the saints. You lean closer to the merchant. "What happens?" The man rubs his thick fingers together near the fire. "Depends who sees." Not helpful again. The older guard sits heavily onto a bench nearby. His chain of keys clinks against the wood. "When I was young," he says slowly, "a cooper's son laughed during midwinter feast." The room grows still. The clerk stops writing. Even now it is hard to tell whether old stories in places like this are warnings, gossip, or merely long shadows cast by fear. Yet every face in the room tightens slightly at the mention. "What happened, you ask?" The guard stares into the flames. Nothing at first. That answer settles over the room far worse than shouting would have. The merchant mutters a prayer beneath his breath. The older guard finally looks at you again. "You'll stay careful." Not exactly a question. You nod because medieval conversations sometimes feel less like dialogue and more like surviving weather. The clerk closes the ledger firmly. "You may go. Riverine still has room if Marta hasn't filled the loft." You thank them and step back outside. Night has settled fully over the town now. Lanterns burn at corners beneath little painted saints meant to protect travellers after dark. Frost glimmers faintly atop barrels stacked beside warehouses. Somewhere across the river comes the dull thud of mill machinery turning slowly in black water. The guard walks with you one final stretch down the lane. "Tomorrow," he says, "market bells ring before sunrise. Stay out of arguments. Do not mock the custom." and if folk lower their voices around certain subjects, I should lower mine too. Wise traveller. At last you reach the inn. Its crooked wooden sign creaks overhead, painted with a faded white heron standing in reeds. Warm orange light spills through horn-pane windows onto the muddy lane. You hear bowls clattering within. The smell of pottage, onions, and river fish wraps around you like a blanket. For the first time since entering the town, you feel something close to relief. Then the door opens. A serving girl steps outside carrying slop for the pigs. She nearly slips on ice, catches herself awkwardly, and lets out the tiniest burst of laughter before freezing completely still. The bucket trembles in her hands. From somewhere across the dark street, unseen in the fog, a voice says quietly, "Careful." The girl's face drains pale. She lowers her eyes at once and hurries back inside without another sound. The inn door closes, and suddenly the warmth glowing behind those windows no longer feels entirely safe. You remain outside the inn a moment longer while cold river air curls around your boots and frost gathers along the edges of the wooden trough nearby. The serving girl has vanished back inside so quickly that the swinging door still creaks from the force of it. Across the lane, the unseen watcher says nothing further. A shutter closes softly overhead. The town returns to silence. The older guard beside you adjusts his cloak. Marta keeps a decent house, he says, better stew than most. That is reassuring. It is not reassurance, it is information. Fair enough. He leaves you there beneath the sign of the White Heron and disappears into the misty lane, keys clinking faintly against his belt until the sound fades altogether. Somewhere beyond the river wall, dogs bark once and then fall silent again. You push open the inn door. Warmth and smoke roll over you immediately. The common room glows beneath hanging beeswax candles and a broad hearth fire built low against the evening chill. Soot darkens the rafters overhead. Bundles of drying herbs hang beside strings of onions and river fish. The smell is thick but comforting cabbage pottage, damp wool, yeast, old oak tables scrubbed with vinegar, and the unmistakable scent of too many travellers drying themselves at once. The room quiets slightly when you enter. Not dramatically. No one turns to stare in theatrical silence. Medieval people generally have too many immediate concerns for that sort of thing. But several faces glance your way with brief, measuring curiosity. Still no smiles. A pair of carters sit near the hearth tearing coarse bread into their stew. A monk in patched robes warms his hands beside the fire while reading a tiny prayer book by candlelight. Two women mend fishing nets near the back wall. Beside the stairs, an elderly man carefully sharpens knives with slow, whispering strokes. Behind the counter stands Marta. You know at once that she runs this inn with the calm authority of someone who has survived 3 harsh winters, 6 outbreaks of fever, and perhaps 1 deeply disappointing husband. Her grey hair is bound beneath a linen veil, and flour dust clings stubbornly to her sleeves. Room, she asks. If you have one. Loft space only. That sounds excellent. It means cold draughts and someone snoring nearby. Still excellent. Marta grunts approvingly at your lowered standards. You hand over a few coins. She bites one automatically before slipping them into a leather pouch hanging from her belt. Medieval trust systems are wonderfully direct. Stews included, she says. Ale costs extra. Blankets cost extra. Hot water costs very extra. Naturally. She slides a wooden bowl toward you and points toward the hearth. You carry your meal carefully through the crowded room while trying not to trip over boots, stools, or the sprawling brown dog asleep beside the fire. The animal opens one eye lazily as you pass. Then, rather shockingly for this town, Its tail begins thumping happily against the rush-covered floor. Several people look up immediately. The dog keeps wagging. A fisherman mutters, "Saints preserve us." The monk lowers his prayer book. Marta clicks her tongue sharply. Brindle. The dog stops at once and rests its chin on its paws with visible disappointment. You sit carefully on a bench near the hearth while trying not to laugh at the absurdity of a dog apparently violating civic law. Best not to test that theory aloud. The stew is thick with barley, onions, and tiny scraps of smoked eel. Hunger makes it taste magnificent. Steam warms your face while rainwater slowly dries from your cloak. Beside you, one of the carters speaks without looking up from his bowl. You entered through North Gate. Yes. Then you met Garin. The guard. The man nods. Good fellow. Sleeps sitting upright sometimes. His companion snorts quietly into his ale before catching himself halfway toward amusement. Both men immediately stare into their bowls as though they have nearly summoned demons through excessive enjoyment. It is impossible not to notice now. The restraint hangs over every conversation like invisible thread pulled too tight. The monk beside the fire closes his prayer book gently. Travelling far, he asks you. South, eventually. Pilgrim Road floods ahead. So I heard. The monk nods solemnly. His robe smells faintly of wet parchment and lavender oil. Monasteries often use herbs against sickness during winter months. Some abbeys burn rosemary branches through sick rooms. Others hang juniper over doors. No one can quite agree whether the herbs truly cleanse the air or merely help people tolerate the smell of illness. The monk studies the fire a while before speaking again. You should not ask too many questions here. About the law. A pause. Yes. Marta passes carrying more bowls. The candles flicker as the outer door opens briefly to admit another traveller wrapped in snow-damp wool. He stamps mud from his boots carefully before entering farther. No one greets him with enthusiasm exactly, but several nod politely. Medieval hospitality often exists in a strange place between kindness and practical survival. Travellers today may bring news, trade, or coin. Tomorrow you may become the traveller needing shelter yourself. The monk lowers his voice. Those who tell the tale never fully agree. Some blame sickness. Some blame grief. Others say the trouble began during a feast. The guard mentioned that. At this, the monk glances around the room carefully. The knife sharpener near the stairs keeps working in slow, steady strokes. People disappeared afterward, the monk says quietly. One of the fishing women abruptly drops her needle. The tiny clink against the floor sounds strangely loud. Marta looks over at once. That is enough talk for tonight, she says firmly. No anger in her voice, only exhaustion. The monk bows his head apologetically. You return to your stew while silence settles again around the hearth. Outside. Wind presses softly against the shutters. Somewhere overhead, footsteps creak across the loft floorboards. Brindle the dog lifts his head and wanders over beside your bench. Slowly, carefully, the animal rests against your leg. Then his tail starts wagging again. You glance around nervously. Marta notices first. Brindle, she warns. The dog sighs dramatically and stops. Honestly, the poor creature may be the bravest soul in town. You scratch behind his ears anyway. He leans gratefully into your hand while pretending not to enjoy himself too visibly. A little later, Marta brings fresh ale to the carters and pauses beside you. You sleep upstairs, she says. Third pallet near chimney wall. Keep your boots close. Rats carry off worse things than bread. Comforting. She studies your face a moment. You nearly smiled earlier. You freeze slightly. So everyone notices. In this town, Marta says softly, yes. The fire cracks low behind her. Candlelight deepens the lines around her tired eyes. Listen carefully, traveller. Folk here are not cruel, and only frightened. Of what? For the first time all evening, Marta hesitates. Even now, it is hard to tell whether the fear itself has become more important than whatever first caused it. At last she answers, of bringing it back. Before you can ask what it means, a sudden burst of sound interrupts the room. Laughter. Small, sharp, uncontrolled. Every head turns instantly. Near the back wall, the new traveller has accidentally splashed ale across his own sleeve. Reflex alone must have caught him. The laugh escapes before he can stop it. Silence crashes down over the inn. The traveller goes pale. Brindle whines softly beside your bench. No one moves. Then, from somewhere upstairs in the dark loft above comes a single heavy thud. Not loud, not dramatic. Just one slow impact against wood. The traveller stares upward. So does everyone else. The monk quietly grips the little cross hanging from his neck. And Marta, still standing beside your table, whispers under her breath. Saints have mercy. Not again. No one in the inn breathes for a moment after the sound from upstairs. The traveller who laughed still stands frozen beside the ale-stained table. One hand clenched around his cup so tightly his knuckles pale beneath the firelight. The common room feels suddenly smaller, tighter somehow, as though the rafters themselves have lowered by an inch. Then comes another sound overhead. A slow creak. Footsteps. Very light. Crossing the loft floor. Brindle presses against your leg and gives a low, uneasy whine deep in his throat. Even the fire seems quieter now, settling into soft red cracks beneath blackened logs. The monk murmurs another prayer. Marta straightens first. You suspect this is not courage exactly, but the exhausted determination of an innkeeper who cannot afford mysterious happenings interfering with supper service. Probably rats, she says firmly. No one looks convinced. The traveller swallows hard. That did not sound like rats. Marta gives him a long look. Then perhaps next time you'll spill your ale more solemnly. A surprisingly effective line, honestly. A few people lower their heads to hide dangerously close expressions. One of the carters nearly smiles into his beard before catching himself in time. The tension eases slightly, just enough for breathing to resume. Still, nobody laughs. Marta grabs a lantern from the wall and points toward the stairs. Come on then. To the loft, the traveller asks weakly. You made the noise. You help investigate the noise. This seems only fair by medieval standards. The poor man looks ready to volunteer for plague duty instead. Yet after a long pause, he follows her reluctantly toward the narrow staircase. The lantern light climbs slowly upward ahead of them, throwing stretched shadows across the beams overhead. The room listens. You hear soft footsteps above, a muttered curse, the shifting scrape of crates. Then Marta's voice echoes down. For heaven's sake. A moment later she descends carrying not a ghost, demon, or ancient curse, but an extremely annoyed goose. The entire room exhales together. Apparently the bird had escaped from somebody's travel basket and wandered loose among the loft pallets. Marta tucks it beneath one arm while the goose protests with offended dignity. The monk closes his eyes briefly in relief. The carter nearest you mutters, dangerous creature. Vicious temperament, his companion agrees. The goose hisses at everyone equally, which feels democratic. Even Marta looks faintly embarrassed as she carries the bird toward the kitchen. Yet the strange thing is not the false alarm itself. It is how desperately everyone needed the explanation. Fear hangs close beneath the surface here, too close. The traveller who laughed sits back down heavily and keeps both hands around his cup as though warmth alone might steady him. No one scolds him further. No fine is demanded, yet the unease remains drifting through the room like smoke. The monk eventually resumes speaking, though quieter now. Market bells ring soon after dawn. He says to you, if you wish bread before the crowds arrive, wake early. You nod. Around you, the inn settles gradually back into its evening rhythm. Bowls empty. Cloaks steam dry near the hearth. One of the fishing women begins softly humming while repairing her nets, though even the melody sounds careful. Marta returns without the goose. Upstairs soon, she announces, fire burns low tonight. A chorus of weary agreement follows. Medieval evenings tend to end early during winter, especially in smaller towns where candles cost money and darkness arrives with determined efficiency. Once the workday ends, people eat, mend tools, whisper gossip, pray a little, and collapse into sleep before dawn drags them back out again. You finish the last of your stew while Brindle snores gently beside the bench. The monk rises first, gathering his prayer book into his sleeves. Peace upon your rest, he says. And yours? He pauses, then quietly adds, if you hear bells before sunrise, do not open the shutters immediately. Before you can ask why, he disappears up the stairs. That feels extremely unresolved. The inn slowly empties into the loft above. Marta douses 2 candles to save wax. Shadows lengthen across the walls. Outside, wind rattles the river shutters with soft, uneven taps. At last you climb the narrow staircase yourself. The loft ceiling slopes low beneath smoke-dark rafters. Straw pallets lie arranged in uneven rows along the walls, separated mostly by optimism. Travellers already settle beneath wool blankets while lantern light flickers softly through the draughty space. Your sleeping place rests near the chimney wall exactly as promised. Cold air leaks through the roof, thatching overhead. Somewhere nearby, someone already snores with astonishing commitment. You remove your boots and wrap yourself in the rough blanket provided. It smells faintly of sheep, smoke, and perhaps 3 previous owners. Brindle circles twice beside your pallet before collapsing directly against your feet without invitation. Honestly, after today, you appreciate the company. Below, the common room noises fade gradually one by one. A bench scrapes. A door bolt slides shut. Marta coughs somewhere near the hearth. Then silence. Not complete silence. Of course. Medieval nights are never truly quiet. Timber creaks constantly. Wind moves through cracks in shutters. Rats scratch behind walls. Horses shift in nearby stables. Far away, river water murmurs beneath ice. And over everything hangs the slow tolling of monastery bells marking the hours. You close your eyes. Sleep almost comes. Then suddenly, bong. A deep bell rolls across the town much closer than before. Your eyes open again immediately. Another follows. Bong! Bong! Not the distant abbey bells this time. These sound heavier, urgent. Around the loft, travellers stir beneath blankets. Someone mutters a prayer. Brindle lifts his head. You rise carefully and move toward the little shutter window beside your pallet. The monk's warning echoes faintly in memory, but curiosity wins the argument because curiosity has always been humanity's least survivable trait. You ease the shutter open slightly. Cold air slips inside, carrying fog and wood smoke. Below, the market square glows beneath torchlight. Dozens of townsfolk move silently across the stones carrying lanterns toward the church, men in heavy cloaks, women clutching prayer beads, children half asleep beneath blankets wrapped around their shoulders. No one speaks loudly. No one smiles. At the center of the square, beside the frozen fountain, stands a tall wooden platform you are almost certain was not there earlier. Several hooded figures surround it, holding candles. A priest lifts something overhead wrapped in dark cloth. The bells continue. Bong! Bong! Beside you, The monk's voice suddenly whispers from the darkness of the loft. I told you not to look. You nearly leap out of your skin. The monk stands 2 pallets away, barely visible beneath the dim lantern glow. What is happening, you whisper? He watches the square below with tired eyes. The vigil of faces. That explains absolutely nothing. No, he says softly, it never does. Down in the square, the priest slowly removes the cloth. Beneath it hangs a polished silver mirror. The crowd lowers their heads instantly. Even now, no one can quite agree whether the ritual protects the town from danger or merely reminds them to fear it. The monk crosses himself quietly. Then, far below in the square, one small child accidentally giggles from exhaustion. The sound barely reaches the loft window, but every torch in the square seems to turn toward the child at once. From the loft window, the square below suddenly looks colder than before. Not physically colder, though the frost certainly thickens along the stones and the wind still drifts sharp from the river. It is the way every head turns toward the child at once that chills you. Torches tilt in unison. Candle flames flicker across solemn faces. The little laugh itself is already gone, swallowed instantly by silence, but the damage appears done. The child's mother drops to one knee so quickly her lantern nearly falls. You hear nothing from the square, no shouting nor no accusation, yet the stillness carries its own kind of pressure. Beside you, the monk quietly shuts the shutter. You have seen enough. What happens now? The monk pulls his patched robe tighter against the draught. Probably nothing. That word again? Probably. You are beginning to dislike it deeply. The monk returns toward his pallet, moving carefully between sleeping travellers. Brindle watches him pass with one sleepy eye before resting his head again across your boots. You whisper after him, "What is the vigil of faces?" The monk pauses in the darkness. A reminder. Of what? He stands silent so long you think he may refuse to answer altogether. Then finally, that joy is dangerous. The floorboards creak softly beneath him as he settles back under his blanket. No further explanation follows. Outside, the bells continue for several minutes longer before fading slowly into the cold night air. Eventually the square empties again. Torches vanish into winding streets. The town folds itself back into darkness. Sleep comes unevenly after that. You drift through shallow dreams filled with candlelight reflecting endlessly inside silver mirrors. Somewhere below, Marta coughs beside the dying hearth. Once, near dawn, Brindle growls quietly toward the stairs before settling again. Then morning arrives all at once with the violent enthusiasm unique to monastery bells. Bong, bong, bong. You wake tangled in rough blankets while pale winter light leaks through cracks in the shutters. Around you the loft stirs with groans, stretching limbs, and the universal medieval expression of people who slept on straw voluntarily because alternatives were limited. One traveller sneezes hard enough to alarm a pigeon in the rafters. Brindle yawns directly into your face. The inn smells now of cold ashes, damp wool, stale ale, and fresh bread rising somewhere below. Honestly, not unpleasant compared to several places you have slept recently. You pull on your boots and descend carefully into the common room. Morning activity has already begun. Marta stands near the hearth ladling oat pottage into bowls while 2 fishermen argue quietly about river ice thickness. The knife sharpener from last night now trims candle wicks beside the window with tiny, precise cuts. And still, not a smile anywhere. Outside the horn-pane windows, dawn spreads pale grey across the square. Market stalls rise slowly beneath hanging lanterns. Farmers unload carts of turnips, onions, cabbages, smoked fish, and winter apples wrapped carefully in straw. Chickens protest from wicker cages with the outrage of creatures personally offended by commerce. You settle near the fire with a bowl of pottage thick enough to repair damaged walls. Marta places coarse bread beside it. Eat while warm. You thank her. She eyes you briefly. You watch the vigil. Apparently nothing remains secret long in this town. A little... Marta sighs through her nose while wiping her hands on her apron. Curiosity kills more travellers than wolves. That seems statistically questionable. No, she says, wolves rarely ask questions. Again, fair. She lowers her voice slightly. The silver mirror belongs to St. Vay's chapel. Folk believe it reveals corruption in the soul. By reflecting smiles. Some swear that smiles invite the hollow man. You blink. The what? At once, the fisherman nearest the fire mutters a warning prayer. The knife sharpener stops cutting candlewick. Marta closes her eyes briefly as though regretting speaking at all. No more of that name in here, she says quietly. The room resumes moving again, though more stiffly than before. No one can quite agree whether the hollow man ever truly existed. Some stories describe a wandering spirit wearing another person's face. Others claim he was a lord driven mad during a winter famine. A few insist he was never a man at all, merely a fear given shape through too many frightened winters and too many graves. Yet even legends grow heavy when repeated for generations. Marta moves away to refill bowls. You eat slowly while watching the square awaken outside. Bells ring again from the church tower, this time lighter and quicker, summoning folk toward market prayers before trade begins. One by one, townspeople gather beneath the church steps. You notice something strange then. Everyone entering the square pauses briefly beside the frozen fountain where last night's platform stood. Most touch the edge of the stone basin. Some whisper prayers. A few glance uneasily toward the church. And one old woman spits over her shoulder 3 times. A folk charm against evil, perhaps. Medieval people possess remedies for nearly every imaginable threat. Salt against spirits, iron against witches, rowan branches against curses, bells against storms, and garlic against nearly anything unfortunate enough to approach closely. The church doors finally open. A procession emerges. At its centre walks a thin priest carrying the silver mirror from the vigil wrapped once more in dark cloth. Behind him trail altar boys with candles and 2 solemn-faced monks carrying a carved wooden chest bound in iron. The townsfolk bow their heads immediately. Even Brindle, lying beneath your bench, lifts his ears uneasily toward the sound of the bells. You notice the monk from last night entering with the procession. His eyes remain lowered. What's in the chest, you ask Marta quietly as she passes. Relic of St. Vay. No one knows. That answer stops you. What do you mean, no one knows? Marta leans closer while pretending to rearrange bowls. The record's burned long ago. Some say the relic is bone. Some say ashes. Others say the chest is empty and always was. And yet everyone still carries it through town. Of course. You stare. Marta shrugs tiredly. People trust rituals more than certainty. Outside, the procession circles slowly around the square while bells echo from the tower overhead. Frost glitters pale upon cloaks and cobbles. The priest chants softly in Latin. Most folk probably do not understand, but know by rhythm alone. The market waits respectfully until the ritual ends. A little girl near the fountain watches the silver-covered mirror with wide eyes. Her father notices and gently turns her head away. The movement feels practiced. Long familiar. Somewhere above the rooftops, crows gather along the church tower like scraps of black cloth caught against the sky. The procession finally disappears into a smaller chapel beside the main church. The heavy oak doors close behind them with a hollow thud. Market noise resumes slowly afterward, though quieter than before. You finish your breakfast while thinking about mirrors, vanished records, forbidden smiles, and relics no one fully trusts. Brindle nudges your hand hopefully for bread. You oblige. At least someone in this town still believes life occasionally contains uncomplicated pleasures. Then the church bell rings once more. A single note. Every conversation in the inn stops again. Marta sets down her ladle very carefully. Outside in the square, people begin turning toward the chapel doors, and from somewhere beyond the market stalls comes the sharp, unmistakable sound of a man crying out in fear. The cry cuts across the market square so suddenly that even the crows burst upward from the church tower in a whirl of black wings. Inside the inn, every head lifts at once. Marta mutters something under her breath that sounds halfway between a prayer and a complaint. Brindle is already on his feet beside the bench, ears raised sharply toward the noise outside. Then comes a second shout. Not pain exactly. Shock! The fishermen near the hearth exchange uneasy looks before hurrying toward the door. Marta snatches her shawl from a peg and follows them into the street with the weary determination of someone who knows avoiding trouble is impossible once a crowd starts running toward it. You follow too, because at this point your survival instincts are clearly decorative. Cold air strikes your face immediately. Frost crunches beneath boots as townsfolk gather near the centre of the square beside the chapel steps. Market stalls stand abandoned mid-setup. Turnips spill from an overturned basket. A chicken escapes its cage entirely and sprints through the confusion with the confidence of a creature thriving in chaos. Near the frozen fountain, a man kneels in the slush, clutching his cap against his chest. It moved, he insists breathlessly. I saw it move. The priest from the procession stands rigid beside him. Two monks grip the iron-bound relic chest between them. The silver mirror rests nearby atop the wooden platform from last night, still half covered with dark cloth. You edge closer through the crowd. What moves? Someone whispers. The cloth, another mutters. Liar. No, look at his face. The kneeling man's face indeed looks pale enough to belong to someone who has either seen a ghost or realized too late what Taverniel was made from. The priest raises both hands for silence. The relic remains blessed. He announces, there is no cause for fear. An ambitious statement considering the current mood. The kneeling man shakes his head violently. I touched the cloth and something beneath it smiled at me. The entire square seems to recoil slightly. Not dramatically, just a collective tightening of shoulders, fingers, jaws. Marta beside you closes her eyes briefly. Oh, wonderful, she mutters. That will help nobody sleep tonight. The priest steps down from the platform. His robes sway heavily across the frost-covered stones. You will calm yourself, he tells the man firmly. I know what I saw. You know fear. The crowd murmurs uneasily. No one can quite agree whether fear spreads faster in medieval towns because people believe more deeply in curses or simply because everyone lives close enough together to hear each other panic through the walls. A pair of watchmen arrive from the gatehouse carrying staves. One is the younger guard from last night. He spots you immediately and gives a look suggesting you continue attracting unusual events with suspicious efficiency. The older guard, Garin, pushes gently through the crowd. What happened? Thomas claims disturbance during procession, the priest says tightly. Thomas claims the relic smiled at him, someone else whispers. Several people make signs against evil at once. One old woman touches an iron key hanging around her neck. Another spits over her shoulder again. Thomas himself still kneels beside the fountain, trembling visibly. Frost gathers along his beard while he stares at the covered mirror as though expecting it to leap into song. Garin crouches beside him. You drink this morning. No. Last night. Ali only. Too much. Not enough for smiling relics. Honestly, fair answer. A ripple passes through the crowd, then as the chapel doors open once more, out steps an elderly monk leaning heavily upon a carved ash staff. His robe hangs thick with winter wool beneath a cloak lined in rabbit fur gone nearly threadbare with age. The townsfolk lower their eyes immediately as he passes. Even the priest steps aside for him. "Brother Edric," Marta whispers quietly beside you. The old monk studies to mass without hurry. His face resembles cracked parchment left too long beside candle smoke. Yet his eyes remain sharp beneath heavy brows. "At your age," Edric says mildly to Thomas, "you should know better than to touch relic cloths during winter procession." A few nervous murmurs ripple through the square. Thomas swallows hard. "I thought the wind caught it." "And did it?" Thomas hesitates. Those who tell the tale never fully agree what happened next. Some insist the old monk already knew the answer. Others say he merely recognized terror when he saw it. Edric taps his staff once against the frozen stones. "Bring him mulled ale," he says calmly. Fear grows quickly on empty stomachs. The tension breaks slightly at that. People shift again. Breathing resumes. Someone retrieves the escaped chicken. Medieval crisis management often involves warm drinks and pretending not to notice collective panic until after supper. The priest still looks uneasy, though. "The vigil should continue," he says quietly. Edric turns his tired gaze toward the silver mirror. "No," he replies, "enough for today." The words carry surprising weight. At once the monks lift the relic chest again while altar boys gather candles from the platform. The mirror disappears beneath its dark covering entirely. As the crowd slowly disperses, Garin approaches you. "You attract strange mornings," he says. "I'm beginning to notice that." He grunts. "Come, market starts soon. Better you look occupied than curious." You accompany him across the square while merchants return reluctantly to their stalls. Trade resumes piece by piece around lingering unease. Fishmongers arrange smoked eels across crushed ice. Bakers display coarse rye loaves. A woman sells tiny wax charms shaped like saints' hands for protection against fever and bad dreams. One stall offers dried herbs bundled with red thread. "Sleepwort," the seller explains to a customer. "Hang above the bed and nightmares pass over the house." Does it work? Sometimes. Again with that word. You and Garin stop beside a cooper repairing barrel hoops near the church wall. The old guard buys hot onion broth from a vendor and hands you a cup. Drink. The broth tastes aggressively medicinal. "What is in this?" "Onions?" That explains part of the experience. Garin almost smiles. Almost. He catches himself immediately and looks away toward the square. "Interesting." You lower your voice. "You nearly did it." "Did what?" "Smiled." The guard stares into his broth for several long seconds. Wind rattles banners overhead. Somewhere nearby a mule brays at existential length. Finally Garin speaks quietly. "When I was young, folk laughed here, same as anywhere." You wait. "My mother sang while baking. My brother joked during planting season. During midwinter feast, the whole square danced." "What changed?" The old guard rubs rough fingers against the cup. "People died." Simple words, heavy ones. "From what?" No one agrees anymore. The church bells ring once overhead. Garin lifts his eyes toward the chapel. "Some blame sickness," he says. "Some blame madness. Others blame the hollow man." Nearby, a merchant immediately mutters a prayer at the forbidden name. Garin notices and lowers his voice further. After the deaths, council outlawed laughter, said joy called the evil closer. And people believe that. They buried enough children to try anything. The market noise softens around you for a moment. Cold wind carries the smell of river water and wood smoke across the square. Brindle wanders nearby, sniffing abandoned cabbage leaves with determined optimism. You glance toward the chapel doors, now closed once more. And the relic. Garen exhales slowly. No one trusted it even before the law. Before you can ask more, a sudden commotion rises near the southern stalls. Two men argue loudly beside a cart of apples. One points accusingly. The other shouts back. Then, disastrously, someone in the growing crowd laughs. Not quietly, not accidentally. A full sharp burst of laughter rings across the market square. Every face turns immediately toward the sound. And standing there among the apple crates, hand still over his mouth too late, is the young watchman from the gatehouse. For one suspended heartbeat, the market square stops breathing. The young watchman stands frozen beside the apple cart, one hand still pressed over his mouth as though he might somehow force the laughter back inside himself. Around him, merchants clutch baskets and tankards without moving. A mule halfway through chewing cabbage simply stares into the distance with admirable emotional neutrality. Even the bells seem quieter. Then the whispering begins. Saints preserve us. He laughed. In daylight, too. The apple seller backs away immediately, making the sign against evil so quickly he nearly strikes himself in the eye. The young watchman lowers his hand slowly. His face has gone completely pale beneath the cold morning air. It slipped, he says weakly. That does not appear to improve matters. Garen beside you closes his eyes with the exhausted expression of a man whose workday has suddenly become much longer. Oh, he mutters. The priest emerges from the chapel almost instantly, as if summoned directly by civic discomfort. Brother Edric follows more slowly behind him, leaning upon his ash staff. The young watchman straightens automatically when he sees them, though his hands still tremble. What happened, the priest demands. A dozen people answer at once. He laughed. At Joran's apples? No, at the mule. The mule bit him. That is true, actually, says someone else. The mule continues chewing with complete innocence. The young watchman swallows hard. I did not mean disrespect. The priest's jaw tightens. Intent matters little. Brother Edric lifts one weathered hand gently. Enough. Silence returns almost at once. The old monk studies the young guard carefully. Frost glitters faintly upon his rabbit fur collar. Around the square, market folk pretend not to stare while staring intensely. What caused the laughter, Edric asks calmly. The young guard hesitates. The mule stole an apple. A pause. Then very quietly, Brindle the dog sneezes beside a cabbage cart. Several nearby townsfolk dangerously approach, smiling, before remembering themselves in time. Edric exhales through his nose. Not amusement exactly, but perhaps the memory of it. You are Tomas's nephew, yes. Yes, brother. Have you slept? The guard blinks in confusion. What? Poor sleep weakens judgment. So does fear. So does hunger. The priest shifts uneasily beside him. Clearly this is not the stern public punishment he expected. Edric taps his staff softly against the stones. You will spend tonight in prayer at St. Vay's chapel. Relief ripples visibly across the young man's face. And tomorrow, Edric continues, you will help Widow Annette repair her chicken fences. The crowd murmurs quietly. Apparently medieval justice often involves manual labour and public embarrassment. The young watchman bows his head immediately. Yes, brother. The priest still looks dissatisfied, but says nothing. No one can quite agree whether Brother Edric's authority comes from wisdom, age, or simply the fact that he remembers too much of the years before the ban. Whatever the reason, even the town council rarely argues with him openly. The market gradually exhales around you. Trade resumes in hesitant little bursts. Apples are restacked. Fish weighed. Bread sliced. The mule steals another apple entirely unnoticed. Garen rubs both hands across his beard. That could have gone worse. You say that often. Often enough. He moves away to speak with the embarrassed young guard, leaving you standing near the cooper's stall while the market settles back into its cold winter rhythm. It is there that you first notice the scribe. He sits beneath a narrow awning near the church wall with a folding table before him, covered in parchment rolls, wax tablets, and little pots of ink sealed carefully against the cold. His fingers are stained almost entirely black. Tiny ink marks speckle even his sleeves and jawline, giving him the appearance of a man slowly losing a battle against writing itself. A wooden sign beside his table reads, "Letters written, petitions copied, records kept." The scribe glances up as you approach. "You need documents?" he asks. "Only curiosity." That cost more. A promising start already. You stop beside the table while he sharpens a quill using a tiny curved knife. Around him lies the scent of vellum, lamp oil, and damp parchment. Several pages nearby contain careful rows of names written in cramped brown ink. You write for the town you ask, for anyone with coin, even smile-related legal emergencies. The scribe pauses. Then, unexpectedly, a tiny snort escapes him before he quickly disguises it as a cough. "Interesting. You're not from here," he says carefully. "That obvious?" You still ask questions aloud. He introduces himself as Odo. His handshake leaves faint ink smudges across your fingers immediately. "Apologies," he says. "Ink travels faster than plague." You glance at the parchments. Town records. Copies mostly. Toll lists. Manor disputes. Marriage contracts. Fines. Smile fines. Odo's quill pauses again. "Yes." The market noise drifts around you softly. Chickens clucking. Merchants bargaining. Distant bells. Nearby. A woman burns rosemary in a little clay dish beneath her stall to ward away winter sickness. You lower your voice. How long has the law existed? Odo leans back slightly on his stool. Depends which record you trust. Now that is the most interesting answer you have heard all day. He studies the square carefully before continuing. Officially 31 years. And unofficially? Hard to say. The scribe pulls open a leather satchel beneath the table. Inside rests a stack of old copied ordinances bound together with faded cord. "These are council records," he says quietly, "or pieces of them." He unties the cord carefully. Several pages look newer than others. One bears water stains. Another seems partially burned along one edge. The first ordinance banning laughter is missing, Odo says. Missing how? Gone. Convenient. Exactly. A gust of wind rattles the awning overhead. Odo lowers his voice even further. The earlier surviving copy begins midway through the decree. What does it say? The scribe hesitates. Then he turns one parchment toward you. The brown ink has faded badly, but several lines remain visible. Therefore, by necessity of preservation, is all visible expressions of mirth prohibited within the walls. Lest the visitation return, the rest disappears into scorched parchment. You look up slowly. What visitation? Odo closes the record quickly. That, he says, is what no one agrees upon. Nearby, church bells ring once more through the cold morning air. The scribe glances nervously toward the chapel doors. "Some believe plague came first," he says quietly. "Others say madness. A few insist people began dying after seeing someone smile in the square." "That sounds impossible." "Yes," Odo replies softly, "which has never stopped people before." He reties the parchments carefully. Brother Edric remembers more than most, but he speaks carefully now. Garin, too. The older folk avoid details altogether. Why? The scribe looks toward the frozen fountain where townspeople still pass with lowered eyes. Because fear hardens into tradition after enough winters. For a moment neither of you speaks. A crow lands atop the church wall nearby. Brindle wanders over beneath the table and immediately falls asleep on Odo's boots. The scribe sighs. This dog likes everyone. That seems healthy. In this town, Odo says, debatable. He scratches behind Brindle's ears absent-mindedly. Then his expression changes suddenly. Across the square, 2 town officials in dark cloaks have emerged from the manor road carrying sealed documents. Odo's face pales slightly. The council reaves. You dislike them. I enjoy breathing. Reasonable again. The Reeves begin posting fresh notices beside the fountain beneath the old smiling ban. People gather cautiously to read. You notice whispers spreading almost immediately through the market crowd. Odo stares toward the notices with growing unease. Then he says very quietly, they never post new decrees before midwinter. The whispers spread across the market square faster than smoke beneath a low ceiling. Merchants abandon stalls half arranged. Housewives clutch baskets tighter against their cloaks. Even the chickens seem offended by the sudden tension, though chickens generally carry themselves as creatures perpetually disappointed by civilization. You and Odo drift closer to the fountain with the growing crowd. The 2 Reeves stand stiffly beside the posted parchment, wearing dark wool cloaks trimmed with narrow strips of fur. Both men carry iron staffs marked with the town seal. Their faces hold the particular expression favored by officials everywhere throughout history, weary confidence mixed with the certainty that someone else will eventually become the problem. One Reeve clears his throat loudly. By order of the council, he announces, all households are to observe strict quiet after sunset until midwinter feast concludes. Murmurs ripple outward immediately. No gatherings beyond family hearths. No music in alehouses. No travelling performers within the walls. That last one truly devastates the local jugglers, presumably. The Reeve continues reading while frost swirls lightly across the square. All masks, ribbons, and festival decorations deemed excessive shall be surrendered for inspection. At this, several women exchange nervous looks. You glance at Odo. That seems severe. It is severe. Why now? Odo folds his ink-stained hands tightly together. Because something frightened them. The Reeve reads the final line. Furthermore, any citizen displaying deliberate mirth during holy observance shall answer directly before the manor court. A silence follows. Not shocked exactly. More tired. As though the town has grown used to fear arriving in fresh clothing every winter. The Reeves nail the parchment firmly into the post beneath the older decree. Hammer blows echo across the frozen square. Tap, tap, tap. One old man mutters beside you. Next they'll outlaw breathing loudly. His wife elbows him instantly before he accidentally enjoys himself. The crowd disperses slowly afterward. Conversations reduced to cautious murmurs. Market trade resumes again, though subdued now beneath the fresh decree. Somewhere nearby a baby begins crying, and 3 separate grandmothers immediately recommend different herbal remedies. Goat milk with thyme, onion broth, warm stones wrapped in cloth. No one can quite agree which cures actually work, yet medieval people continue prescribing all of them simultaneously with tremendous confidence. Odo gathers his parchments quickly. I should return these before council decides scribes are dangerous too. You think they might. They think almost everything is dangerous. He hesitates. Come tonight if you want answers. To where? My workroom, behind the chandlery near River Lane. You trust me rather quickly? Odo snorts softly. You fed Brindle. That is good enough for him, apparently. The dog thumps his tail proudly against the cobbles. Then Odo lowers his voice. There are older records, hidden ones. Before you can ask further, He slips away into the crowd, carrying his satchel tight beneath his cloak. You remain near the square a while longer, watching the market struggle back toward normalcy. A baker arranges little honey cakes shaped like saints' bells. Fur traders argue over squirrel pelts. Children chase each other carefully without laughing, which may be the saddest athletic event you've ever witnessed. At noon, monastery bells ring again. The sound rolls over rooftops while pale winter sunlight struggles briefly through low clouds. Smoke rises from chimneys all across town. Somewhere beyond the walls, ravens wheel over frozen fields. You wander slowly through the market lanes, partly from curiosity and partly because lingering beside fires too long tends to attract chores in medieval buildings. Near the southern edge of the square, you discover a cluster of stalls selling festival goods despite the new decree. Candle makers display bundles of dyed wax. A cooper paints tiny stars upon ale mugs. An old woman sells winter charms stitched from red thread and dried herbs. One item catches your attention immediately. Masks. Dozens of them hang from cords beneath a striped awning. Not cheerful masks either. Every face appears solemn, serene, or mournful. Some wear painted tears. Others bear closed eyes or expressionless mouths. One resembles a sleeping saint. Another looks disturbingly like your tax collector probably would. Behind the stall stands a thin craftsman sanding wood carefully with a scrap of rough cloth. Fine sawdust coats his sleeves. You carve these, you ask. The craftsman nods without looking up. For midwinter procession. Why masks? He studies you briefly. You truly are new here. Apparently your confusion has become socially visible. The craftsman introduces himself as Corin. His fingers are nicked with old cuts from carving knives. Beside his tools sits a tiny clay brazier warming glue over coals. Before the ban, Corin says while smoothing a mask's cheek, folk dance during midwinter. And afterward, they still dance. You look again at the solemn masks. Oh, Corin nods. No smiles visible. Council approved it generations ago. That seems technically creative. Medieval life survives on technicalities. An excellent summary, honestly. He lifts one finished mask toward the light. Its painted face bears calm, half-lidded eyes, and the faintest trace of peace without approaching actual happiness. Some families pass masks down for decades, he says. Others burn them after feast day to carry sorrow away with the ashes. Does anyone still enjoy the festival? Corinne pauses. Even now, it's hard to tell whether people here remember joy fondly or suspiciously. At home, he says at last. Behind closed shutters, perhaps. Nearby, a little girl reaches toward one of the painted masks. Her mother gently pulls her hand away before paying for a smaller one wrapped carefully in cloth. You notice then that nearly every mask conceals the mouth more heavily than the eyes. Interesting. Corin follows your gaze. The mouth matters most, he says quietly. Cold wind shifts through the market, carrying the smell of roasting chestnuts from a nearby brazier. For a fleeting instant, the square almost feels festive despite itself. Then church bells ring again. Always the bells. A procession of monks crosses the far side of the square, carrying bundles of rushes toward the chapel. Townsfolk step respectfully aside. Among them you spot Brother Edric moving slowly with his ash staff. The old monk notices you too. He changes direction and approaches the stall. Corin bows his head immediately. Brother. Edric studies the hanging masks a while before speaking. You still carve the sleeping faces. People request them. They always did. The old monk picks up one small child-sized mask, painted pale blue around the eyes. When I was a boy, he says softly, midwinter streets sounded different. Neither you nor Corin answers. Edric returns the mask carefully to the table. You ask many questions, traveller. So everyone keeps telling me, questions are healthy, the monk says, but answers are heavy things. The bells fade slowly overhead. You lower your voice. What was the visitation? Corin immediately looks away. Edric remains silent long enough for snowflakes to begin drifting lazily through the square. No one remembers clearly anymore, he says at last. That cannot be true. It can, Edric replies softly, when remembering hurts enough. The old monk turns to leave, then pauses. Tonight, he says without facing you, avoid the north alley after dark. Why? Edric grips his staff more tightly. Because some people still smile there. With that deeply alarming statement, he walks away through the drifting snow while monastery bells continue tolling softly across the town. Corin watches him disappear, then very quietly says, "He used to smile more than anyone." Snow continues drifting over the market square long after Brother Edric disappears into the crowd. Not heavy snow, just thin wandering flakes turning slowly through the pale afternoon light like ash from an invisible fire. They gather softly atop wagon covers, mask stalls, and the frozen rim of the fountain where the decree still hangs beneath its crust of frost. For the safety of all souls, you stand beside Corin's stall watching townsfolk move through the square with lowered heads and careful expressions. The solemn masks sway gently overhead in the cold breeze. He smiled, you ask, eventually? Corin keeps sanding another carved face without lifting his eyes. When I was little, he says quietly, folk said Brother Edric laughed loud enough to wake pigeons from the church roof. That image feels almost impossible now. The old monk seems built entirely from caution and winter dust. What changed him? Corin shrugs faintly. The same thing that changed everyone. Helpful again. A nearby vendor begins roasting chestnuts over coals, filling the square with warm, smoky sweetness. Children gather hopefully around the brazier until their parents usher them onward. One tiny boy wearing boots far too large for him nearly slips on ice. Instinctively, he grins at himself. His mother reacts at once. Not cruelly. That is the strange part. There is no anger in these corrections, only fear. She kneels quickly, adjusting his scarf while whispering something urgent into his ear. The boy's smile fades immediately. You look away. After a while, Corin wraps several finished masks in cloth and begins packing his stall before sunset. Council dislikes folk lingering outside after bells now, he explains. Because of the decree. Because of winter. That seems broader. In this town, Corin says, winter and fear often arrive together. Brindle appears from nowhere carrying half a sausage again. No one knows where he keeps finding these. The dog drops proudly at your feet before trotting in circles with his tail wagging furiously. Corin watches him with visible disbelief. I swear that animal wants execution. You crouch to scratch Brindle behind the ears. Maybe he simply refuses to participate. Dangerous philosophy for a dog. The church bells ring low overhead, announcing the approach of evening prayers. Market folk hurry now, bundling goods beneath wool covers and shuttering stalls against the growing cold. You remember Odo's invitation then? The chandlery near River Lane. Answers. Possibly terrible answers, which historically remain the most common kind. You leave the square just as lanterns begin glowing along the streets. Snowmelt turns cobbles slick beneath your boots. Smoke thickens in the narrow alleys where supper fires burn behind shutters. The town changes after dusk. Daytime markets at least carried movement and ordinary distraction, but evening draws everything inward. Candlelight flickers behind horn windows. Voices soften. Doors bolt. The smell of cabbage stew, damp straw, and wood smoke settles heavily between the leaning timber houses. Somewhere nearby, someone plays a flute very quietly. The tune stops abruptly halfway through. Ahead, River Lane slopes toward the docks where mist curls black over slow-moving water. Rope lines creak against moored barges. Frost clings silver-white to stacked fish crates and abandoned nets. You eventually find the chandlery tucked between a cooper's yard and a narrow alley, barely wide enough for two determined goats. The shop smells strongly of wax. Rows of candles fill the front window, beeswax tapers for wealthy homes, cheap tallow stubs for ordinary folk, thick monastery candles marked with saints' symbols pressed into the sides. A tiny bell jingles softly as you enter. Inside, warmth glows golden against shelves crowded with wax moulds, oil lamps, bundles of rushes, and jars of rendered fat. Behind the counter sits an elderly woman knitting socks with astonishing speed. She glances up once. "You're late. I did not realize we'd agreed on a time." Odo worries when people wander after dusk. Reasonable again. Without another word, she jerks her needles toward a back curtain. You pass through into a cramped workroom thick with parchment stacks, loose papers, candle smoke, and enough scattered ink pots to stain a monastery permanently blue. Odo sits hunched over a desk copying records by lantern light. Brindle already lies asleep beneath the table as though he owns the establishment. Traitor. The scribe looks up as you enter. You came. You invited me into a suspicious hidden archive. Curiosity won. That is usually how disasters begin. The room is small but strangely comforting. Wax drips harden across the desk edges. Shelves sag beneath old documents tied with faded cords. Dried lavender hangs from rafters to discourage moths. A brazier glows softly in one corner beside a kettle steaming with herb tea. Odo motions toward a stool. Sit, and if the floor collapses beneath parchment weight, try to fall somewhere historically important. You settle carefully while he rummages through several stacks. No council spies followed you. Not unless Brindle reports directly to the Reeves. The dog lifts one eye lazily. Inconclusive, Odo says. At last he produces a bundle wrapped in cloth far older than the records you saw earlier. The edges appear brittle with age. These survived the archive fire, he says quietly. You said the first decree was missing. It is. Then what are these? Copies of sermons, funeral rolls, witness accounts. He unties the cloth carefully. The parchment inside smells faintly of smoke and mildew. No one reads these now, Odo says. Council discourages it. You lean closer while lantern light flickers across faded ink. One document lists names beside little crosses. Another describes fever spreading during midwinter 31 winters earlier. A third contains fragments of testimony written in hurried, cramped lines. Heard laughter in the square after curfew. Mirror uncovered during feast. Children missing by morning bells. Your skin prickles slightly. These are real, as real as anything that old. Odo flips to another page. Here the handwriting changes entirely. Brother Edric insists joy itself is not the danger. Council refuses further burial within church grounds. Faces found smiling. The room feels colder suddenly despite the brazier. You look up slowly. Smiling, Odo nods uneasily. Most records end there. No plague. There was sickness too. Winter fever, perhaps. But afterwards stories tangled together. The lantern sputters softly. Outside, wind rattles the shutters. No one can quite agree whether memory becomes unreliable because time passes or because fear edits events into shapes people can survive. You turn another page carefully. This one appears partially burned. Only fragments remain visible. Mirror carried from Old Keep Chapel. Those who looked longest began hearing voices. Laughter returned after dark. A knock sounds suddenly against the outer shop door. Both of you freeze. Another knock follows. 3 slow taps. The elderly chandlery woman calls faintly from the front room, closed. A man's voice answers through the wood. Council business. Odo goes pale instantly. He snatches the parchments closed. Hide those. Where? Anywhere not obvious. You grab the bundle just as another heavier knock rattles the shop. Brindle rises with a low growl. From the front room comes the scrape of a bolt sliding back. And then, through the thin wall, you hear one of the Reeves say quietly, "We need to speak with the scribe. The workroom suddenly feels much too small for breathing comfortably." Odo snatches loose papers from the desk while you shove the older parchments beneath a stack of candle moulds beside the brazier. Brindle's growl deepens low in his chest, though the dog wisely avoids barking. Even he seems to understand that Reeves arriving after dark rarely improves anyone's evening. In the front room, floorboards creak beneath heavy boots. The elderly chandlery woman says dryly, "You've tracked mud across my clean floor already. Very impressive work." One Reeve mutters an apology that sounds entirely insincere. Odo wipes ink hurriedly from his fingers onto an already ruined cloth and tries to compose the expression of an innocent town. Scribe definitely not hiding suspicious records about smiling corpses. Mediocre success, honestly. The curtain jerks aside. 2 Reeves enter carrying lanterns that throw hard yellow light across the cramped room. Their dark cloaks glisten with melted snow. One is broad and red-faced with frost caught in his beard. The other younger, narrow-eyed, and noticeably sharper in manner. Both glance immediately at you. The younger Reeve speaks first. "Traveller. Reeve." A thrilling exchange. Odo stands slowly from behind the desk. "You require documents." "Possibly," the older Reeve says. The younger one studies the room carefully. His gaze lingers on the shelves, the parchment stacks, the brazier, and Brindle. The dog stares back with complete distrust. "We heard," the younger Reeve says, "that you've been discussing old records in the marketplace." Odo folds his ink-stained hands together. "I discuss records constantly. It is unfortunately my profession." The Reeve does not smile. "Of course not. The council prefers certain histories remain undisturbed during midwinter season. Then perhaps the council should stop losing archives to fires." A dangerous sentence. Even the chandlery woman in the next room stops knitting for a second. The older Reeve sighs heavily through his nose. He looks less angry than tired. "No trouble tonight, Odo. No trouble planned." The younger Reeve steps closer to the desk. "You've spoken with Brother Edric recently." "Most people have." "About the old feast." Silence hangs there. Outside, wind scrapes loose snow along the alley stones. The Reeve notices your attention immediately. "You," he says sharply. "What have you heard?" You consider several options and select survival. Mostly warnings not to ask questions. The older Reeve actually grunts approvingly at that. Wise advice. The younger man remains unconvinced. He scans the room once more before his gaze settles on a partially visible parchment edge beneath the candle moulds. Your stomach tightens slightly. He steps toward the shelf. Brindle stands instantly between them. Not aggressively, just firmly. Tail stiff, ears raised. The Reeve stops. The chandlery woman calls from the other room without looking up from her knitting. "Dog bites councilman." A pause. "Sometimes," she adds. The Reeve slowly withdraws his hand. "Honestly, Brindle may now rank among your favourite medieval citizens." The older Reeve rubs frost from his beard. "Listen carefully," he says to Odo. "The council means to keep peace through midwinter. Fear spreads quickly enough already. Fear seems to be spreading very efficiently with or without my help." The younger Reeve ignores that. "Curfew bells ring after sunset tomorrow. No wandering afterward. He looks directly at you. That includes travellers. You nod obediently. The Reeves finally turn toward the curtain again. Before leaving, the older man pauses. If Brother Edric speaks of the past, he says quietly, remember he is old. Then both men disappear into the front shop. Moments later, the outer door opens and closes again beneath gusting wind. Silence returns slowly. The chandlery woman snorts from beyond the curtain. Pompous scarecrows. Odo sags onto his stool like a puppet with cut strings. Brindle resumes lying beneath the desk. Apparently satisfied civilization has survived another crisis. You retrieve the hidden parchments carefully. That felt concerning. It was concerning. You do this often. Less often than last winter. Not comforting. Odo pours steaming herb tea into 2 clay cups with hands still slightly shaking. What happened last winter? Council searched half the town after someone painted smiling faces on the chapel doors. You stare. They found the culprit. No. Who do they suspect? Odo hands you a cup. Everyone. The tea tastes strongly of mint and something bitter underneath. Outside, bells ring softly from the monastery tower, marking another evening hour slipping away. Odo lowers his voice again. The Reeves fear panic more than curses. Are they wrong? The scribe hesitates. At last he pulls another parchment from the bundle. Smaller than the others, older too. This came from the Abbey archive, he says quietly. Hidden inside a prayer book. You lean closer. The ink has nearly faded beyond reading, but several lines remain clear enough beneath lantern light. Those who heard the laughter beneath the keep. Mirror returned to chapel under armed guard. Brother Aldwyn claims reflections moved after candles extinguished. You glance up sharply. Reflections moved. Odo shrugs uneasily. Monks write strange things. Monks usually avoid inventing haunted mirrors. Not during famine winters. Fair point again. He traces another line lower down. Lord Berenger ordered silence within the walls until visitation passes. There it is. The beginning, perhaps. Lord Berenger ruled the town, you ask. 31 years ago. And the visitation began during his feast. So the stories say. Odo stares toward the shuttered window. Midwinter feast inside the old keep. Music, dancing, laughter. The word itself sounds almost foreign in the room. Then something happened. What? No surviving record explains clearly. The lantern flame bends suddenly as wind slips through the shutters. Brindle lifts his head again. Somewhere outside in the alley, footsteps crunch softly through snow. Not passing by, stopping. Odo hears it too. The footsteps remain motionless beyond the wall. Then comes a faint sound. At first you think it is the wind. Then you realize someone outside is laughing. Very softly. Not cheerful laughter either. Thin. Breathless. Almost whispering. The sound drifts through the alley beneath the shutters while every hair rises along your arms. Odo goes completely still. No, he whispers. The laughter comes again. Brindle growls sharply now. The chandlery woman stands abruptly in the front room. You hear knitting needles clatter onto wood. Then, from outside the shop door, a voice says quietly through the snow and darkness, "Open." Nobody moves. Another soft laugh follows. Not loud. Not human enough somehow. The shutters tremble faintly. Odo grips the edge of the desk hard enough to whiten his fingers. Even now, it is hard to tell whether the town fears an old curse, its own memories, or simply the sound of laughter after too many winters spent without it. The voice outside speaks once more. Please. Brindle barks, and all at once the church bells begin ringing wildly across the town. The bells erupt across the town with such sudden violence that the shutters rattle in their frames. Bong, bong, bong. Not the slow, orderly monastery bells you've grown used to. These ring fast, overlapping wildly through the snowy dark like men pulling ropes in panic. Outside the shop, the strange laughter stops instantly. Silence crashes into its place. Brindle lunges toward the door, barking furiously now, claws skidding against the wooden floorboards. Odo nearly drops his lantern trying to stand. The Chandri woman snatches an iron poker from beside the stove with alarming speed for someone who appeared approximately 100 years old moments earlier. No one opens that door, she snaps. Another sound comes from outside. Running footsteps. Several of them. Voices shouting through the alley. North Lane. Bring lanterns. Move. The figure outside vanishes. You hear boots crunch quickly away through snow. Odo exhales shakily. That was not funny anymore. Was it funny before? Only in the tragic sense. The bells continue hammering through the night while more voices echo distantly across the river quarter. Somewhere nearby a dog howls. Not Brindle. Brindle sounds ready to personally fight the entire supernatural world and possibly win. The Chandlery woman lowers the poker slightly. Council patrol, she mutters. Something happened. Odo grabs his cloak immediately. You're not going out there, you say? I absolutely am. Why? Because if bells ring like that and nobody checks, tomorrow's rumours become twice as bad. Again, frustratingly reasonable. Within moments, all three of you step into the alley wrapped against the cold. Snow falls harder now, spinning through lantern light and gathering along roof edges. The river mist beyond the lane glows pale beneath torch fire spreading through the streets. People emerge everywhere despite curfew fears. Doors crack open, lanterns lift, shouted questions drift between houses. What happened? Where? Who saw it? No answers yet. The church bells still rage overhead. You follow Odo uphill toward the market square while Brindle bounds ahead through the snow with reckless enthusiasm. More townsfolk hurry the same direction, bundled in blankets and winter cloaks. At the corner near the cooper's yard, you nearly collide with Garin. The old guard carries a spear and looks exhausted already. Back inside, he orders immediately. What happened, Odo asks. Garin hesitates. Then, something at the north alley. Not reassuring. You remember Brother Edric's warning instantly. Avoid the north alley after dark. Apparently excellent advice. The crowd thickens as you near the square. Lanterns flicker across anxious faces. Snow crunches beneath dozens of hurried boots. A child cries somewhere nearby until his mother hushes him softly against her shoulder. At the fountain, Reeves struggle to push townsfolk backward from one narrow street leading north between two leaning warehouses. Torchlight flickers there. And voices. Low urgent voices. You catch fragments only. Standing in the snow. Would not answer. Smiling. The word moves through the crowd like icy water. Garin grips your shoulder before you drift closer. No, I only want to look. Exactly. The old guard's face appears greyer than usual beneath the torchlight. The younger watchman from earlier stands nearby too, clutching his stave tightly. His embarrassment from the market incident has clearly been replaced by pure terror. Then the crowd shifts. Brother Edric emerges from the north alley. The old monk walks slowly through falling snow with two Reeves beside him. His ash staff taps steadily against the frozen stones. Tap, tap, tap. Every face watches him. The priest hurries forward immediately. Brother! Edric says nothing at first. Snow gathers along his hood and shoulders. In the torchlight, his face looks terribly old. At last he speaks. Take everyone home. The priest blinks. What did you find? Edric's gaze lifts briefly across the crowd. Fear, he says softly. That answer satisfies nobody. Murmurs spread immediately. Was someone hurt? Who was smiling? Did you see it? One woman crosses herself repeatedly while whispering prayers to St. Odric beneath her breath. Garin steps forward. Brother Edric. The old monk interrupts quietly. No crowds tonight. His tone stops further argument better than shouting could have. The reeves begin forcing the gathering apart. Reluctantly townsfolk obey, though nobody leaves quickly. Fear and curiosity pull against each other across every face. As the crowd thins slightly, you catch a glimpse down the north alley at last. Only for a second. A lantern burns near the warehouse wall, and beside it, half covered already by falling snow, lies a wooden festival mask. One of Corin's. The painted face wears closed, peaceful eyes, and an unmistakable smile. Garin immediately blocks your view again. You saw nothing. I definitely saw something. The old guard exhales heavily. Then be smart enough not to repeat it loudly. He turns away before you can ask more, pushing back toward the alley entrance where reeves now nail boards across the narrow lane. Actual boards. Apparently the official medieval response to unexplained smiling is carpentry. The bells finally stop. Silence settles over the square once more except for the whisper of snow and low nervous conversations drifting between doorways. Odo pulls you aside beneath the awning of a shuttered baker's stall. This is worse than last year. There were incidents last year too. Smiling symbols mostly. Strange noises. He lowers his voice further. One woman swore she heard laughter beneath the old keep. You glance uphill toward the dark silhouette of the keep looming faintly beyond rooftops. What is under the keep? No one goes there now. Not a proper answer again. Nearby, Brother Edric stands alone beside the fountain, speaking quietly with Garin. The old monk suddenly looks toward you through the drifting snow. Even across the square, his gaze feels heavy. A moment later he gestures once with 2 fingers. Come here. Odo notices too. You should go, he says nervously. That sounds ominous. In this town, Odo mutters, everything sounds ominous. You cross the square slowly while snow settles thicker upon the stones. The fountain basin gleams pale beneath frost. Nearby, the decree flaps softly in the wind. For the safety of all souls, Brother Edric waits beside the frozen water. Up close, he appears deeply tired. Candle smoke clings faintly to his robes. Snow melts slowly along the fur trim of his hood. You ignored my warning, he says calmly. Yes, that was unwise. Probably. Again with that word. The old monk studies the darkened north alley a while before speaking again. When fear lasts long enough, he says quietly, people begin feeding it without realizing. You think the town created this itself? I think grief changes shape over years. The fountain creaks softly beneath ice. You lower your voice. What happened in the alley? Edric closes his eyes briefly. When the bells rang tonight, he says, we found a mask placed beneath the warehouse wall. The smiling one. Yes, and... The monk grips his ash staff tightly. There were footprints leading away from it. Whose? Edric opens his eyes again. Barefoot. Snow continues falling around the silent square. Then the old monk says something even quieter, and they began at the sealed door beneath the keep. Snow falls thicker after the bells stop, softening the market square into blurred shapes of lantern light and shadow. Brother Edric's words linger in the cold air between you. The sealed door beneath the keep. Barefoot tracks. For a moment you simply stare uphill toward the dark outline of the old keep rising above the town walls. Its towers vanish half hidden behind drifting snow and chimney smoke. No torch burns there tonight. The monk watches your face carefully. You're already thinking about going there, he says. I'm thinking that nobody explains anything fully in this town. That is because full explanations rarely comfort people. A fair point, though deeply inconvenient. Around the square, townsfolk continue hurrying home beneath cloaks and lanterns. The Reeves push the remaining crowd apart while muttering about curfew. Snow gathers atop the abandoned market stalls and the boarded north alley entrance. Brindle trots over beside you, carrying what appears to be an entire heel of bread stolen from somewhere during the confusion. At least one citizen continues living boldly. Brother Edric sighs softly at the dog. He likes you. He seems emotionally healthier than everyone else here. That is because he remembers only today. The old monk begins walking slowly toward the chapel. You follow beside him while Brindle bounds ahead through the snow, leaving crooked paw prints across the square. Lanterns flicker beneath the chapel porch. The heavy oak doors stand partly open now, warm candlelight spilling across the frozen steps. You still have questions, Edric says quietly. Many. You will not like all the answers. Probably. The monk gives you a tired sideways glance. You've learned the town's favourite word. Inside the chapel, warmth and incense wrap around you immediately. Beeswax candles burn before little painted saints blackened with age and smoke. The air smells of old wood, melted wax, damp wool, and faintly of rosemary. A few townsfolk kneel in prayer near the back pews. One woman clutches a child against her shoulder while whispering quietly into his hair. Near the altar stands the silver mirror from the vigil, now draped completely in dark cloth. You notice iron nails hammered into the wooden stand around its frame. Interesting detail. Brother Edric sees you looking. Folk remedies, he says. For mirrors. For fear. The monk leads you through a side door into a smaller chamber lined with shelves of crumbling manuscripts and cracked candle stubs. A fire burns low inside a tiny hearth. This room belonged to Brother Aldwin once, Edric says. The monk from the records. You read more than I hoped. The old monk lowers himself carefully into a chair beside the fire with the slow stiffness of age and old winters. Snow taps softly against the narrow window shutters. You sit opposite while Brindle circles twice before collapsing near the hearth. For a while Edric simply watches the flames. Then he speaks. 31 winters ago, Lord Berenger held the largest midwinter feast this town had ever seen. At last, music filled the keep halls for 3 nights. Jugglers, musicians, dancers, traders came from distant roads. Wine flowed like spring floods. People were happy. Yes, the word sounds strange in the little room. Edric folds his hands slowly. Then the relic arrived. You glance toward the draped mirror outside. The mirror? No, the relic chest. The monk's firelit face tightens slightly. It came from a ruined chapel farther north after a monastery burned during fever season. The monks there believed the relic holy. And was it? No one knew. Outside, bells ring softly now in distant measured tones instead of panic. Edric continues. Lord Berenger displayed the relic during the feast. He wished the town blessed before winter deepened. And then, the monk stares into the flames. 3 days later, people began dying. The fire crackles softly between you. From illness. Some did. Others, Edric hesitates. Others changed first. Not reassuring phrasing. The old monk rises stiffly and crosses toward one shelf where several ancient books lean crookedly beneath dust. From between them he removes a tiny leather-bound journal. Brother Aldwin kept this hidden, he says. The pages inside look brittle with age. Edric opens carefully to one marked section and passes it across. The handwriting trembles unevenly down the page. Folk wake laughing in empty streets. Children hear voices beneath chapel floor. Lord Berenger orders mirrors covered. You read further. Those who smile longest grow strange by morning. A chill slides slowly down your arms despite the fire. What does that mean? Edric sits again heavily. No one ever learned. That cannot possibly satisfy you as an explanation. It has not satisfied me for 31 years. The monk rubs tired fingers across his brow. Fear spread faster than sickness. People stopped gathering. Then came the first winter deaths. From the curse, from cold, hunger, fever. He looks up sharply, but fear attached itself to the smiling. Outside the chamber, chapel candles flicker softly in unseen draughts. No one can quite agree whether the town survived because the ban worked or because the sickness simply ended on its own. You glance again at the journal. What about the keep? Edric grows quiet. At last. During the final feast night, several guests fled below the keep, claiming laughter echoed beneath the halls after the music stopped. From underground. Yes, and the sealed door. The old wine vault passage. The monk grips the journal tightly. After the deaths, Lord Berenger ordered it closed with stone and iron. Brindle suddenly lifts his head near the hearth. Ears raised. You hear it a second later, too. A faint sound somewhere outside the chamber. Not bells, not footsteps. Laughter. Very distant this time. Thin as wind slipping beneath doors. Brother Edric closes the journal immediately. Stay here. He rises faster than before and moves into the chapel carrying a lantern. You follow, despite his instruction, because poor decisions remain your strongest medieval survival skill. The chapel beyond lies mostly empty now. Candles tremble softly before the altar. The laughter comes again. Faint. From below. You and Edric both stop moving at once. Brindle growls low in his throat. The sound drifts upward through the floorboards beneath the chapel. Not loud. Not cheerful, just enough to raise every hair along your neck. Edric's face goes pale beneath the candlelight. There should be no one down there, he whispers. You notice then another detail. The draped silver mirror beside the altar has begun moving slightly. Not much, just a tiny swaying motion beneath the black cloth, as though something behind it shifted position. Brindle barks sharply. The laughter stops instantly. Silence fills the chapel. Then, from somewhere beneath the floor, comes 3 slow knocks. Knock, knock, knock. Brother Edric grips his lantern so tightly the light shakes. And very quietly, almost to himself, the old monk whispers. It remembers the feast. The chapel remains frozen in silence after the knocking stops. Brother Edric does not move. Neither do you. Even the candle flames seem to lean inward, listening. Brindle stands stiff-legged near the altar with his fur raised along his spine, staring toward the floorboards beneath the draped mirror. A faint draught slips through the chapel, carrying cold stone smells from somewhere below ground damp earth. Old mortar, extinguished torches. The old monk finally exhales shakily. That passage should have remained sealed. You glance toward the floor. The wine vault? Edric nods once. Long before the keep stood here, tunnels connected the chapel crypts to the lower halls beneath the hill. During famine winters, monks stored grain there. Later the Lord stored wine. He swallows, and eventually secrets. The black cloth over the mirror sways again slightly. Not enough to prove anything. Far too much to ignore. You lower your voice. Tell me honestly, do you think something supernatural is happening? Brother Edric looks suddenly older than before. I think fear leaves marks upon places. He pauses, and sometimes people help those marks grow. Not exactly a no. Another soft sound echoes below. This time not laughter. Footsteps. Slow, dragging slightly. Brindle barks again, louder now. The noise stops immediately. The monk turns toward the side chamber. "Help me!" Within moments you carry lanterns, ropes, and an iron pry bar from the storage shelves, while Edric unlocks a narrow wooden door behind the altar, rarely noticed beneath hanging cloths and candle shadows. Cold air spills upward the moment it opens. Ancient air. Dust, damp stone, and something faintly metallic underneath. A staircase descends into darkness. Naturally it does. The monk lifts his lantern. Stay close. "Have you been down there recently?" "No." That is not reassuring. It was not intended to reassure. Brindle trots ahead before either of you can stop him, claws clicking across the worn stone steps. You descend carefully. The staircase spirals beneath the chapel through cramped walls sweating with moisture. Meltwater drips steadily somewhere below. Cobwebs cling to the corners. The air grows colder with every step. Lantern light reveals faded painted symbols along the stonework: saints, bells, vines, little protective crosses scratched hurriedly into mortar by nervous hands long ago. No one can quite agree whether symbols protect people from darkness or simply make them feel less alone inside it. At the bottom, the passage opens into a low crypt corridor lined with alcoves holding ancient burial stones. Most names have worn unreadable with time. Brindle sniffs furiously at the floor ahead, then stops beside muddy footprints. Bare footprints. Your stomach tightens immediately. They lead deeper into the tunnels. Edric stares at them silently. Fresh. Very fresh. The monk whispers a prayer beneath his breath before continuing onward. The corridor twists beneath the hill in uneven directions. Water drips from the ceiling. Once you pass an old iron gate bent partially from its hinges, another tunnel has collapsed entirely beneath fallen stone and rotted beams. Then the passage widens suddenly into an old storage chamber. Rows of ancient wine racks crumble against the walls. Broken barrels lie scattered across the floor beneath decades of dust. Someone long ago painted protective prayers above the arches in faded red pigment. At the center of the chamber stands a long wooden table. Recently disturbed, lantern light catches fresh scratches across the dust. And there, placed carefully atop the table, rests another festival mask. Smiling, Brindle growls deeply. You step closer despite every sensible instinct objecting violently. The mask resembles Corin's work, but older. The wood is darkened with age. Tiny cracks run along the painted cheeks. Yet the smile remains unmistakable. Brother Edric looks genuinely frightened now. This should not be here. You recognize it. The monk nods slowly. Feast masks. What? During the final midwinter feast, Lord Berenger ordered masks made for dancing. A cold weight settles in the room. The old monk touches the edge of the table carefully. When fear began spreading afterward, people burned most of them. But not all. Edric says nothing. The lantern flames flicker suddenly. A breeze moves through the chamber. Impossible, because there should be no open exit nearby. Then comes the laughter again. Closer this time. Not from ahead. Behind you. You turn instantly. Nothing there. Only darkness filling the corridor beyond the lantern glow. Brindle snarls toward it. The laughter stops. Then footsteps begin moving away rapidly through the tunnels. Someone is down here. Wait, you shout before wisdom intervenes too late. You grab the lantern and run after the sound. Behind you, Edric calls sharply. No. The corridor twists hard left. Your boots splash through shallow water while lantern light jerks wildly across old stones. Ahead, the footsteps continue retreating fast. Then you catch sight of movement. A figure disappearing around another corner. Barefoot, wrapped in dark cloth. You chase harder because apparently self-preservation abandoned this story several sections ago. The tunnel narrows. Low roots push through cracked ceiling stones overhead. Your lantern throws monstrous shadows across the walls. Ahead, the figure slips through a half-open iron door. You reach it seconds later. Beyond lies a circular chamber beneath the keep itself. And there, at the far side beside another sealed stone archway, stands the figure at last. A woman. Thin, barefoot indeed. Her dark hair hangs loose across her shoulders. In one hand she holds a carved wooden mask. Smiling, she watches you silently across the chamber. Not hostile, not frightened, just terribly tired. Your breathing fogs the freezing air. Who are you? The woman says nothing at first. Behind you, Brother Edric arrives breathless with Brindle close beside him. The moment the lantern light fully reaches her face, the old monk stops dead. His expression crumples completely. No, he whispers. The woman lowers the mask slowly, and for the first time you see her actual face. She is smiling. Not wildly, not unnaturally, just softly, almost sadly. Brother Edric grips the wall to steady himself. Elsewith, he breathes. The woman's eyes glisten in the lantern light. You buried me 30 years ago, she says quietly. The chamber falls utterly still. Somewhere above, faint through layers of stone, the monastery bells begin ringing midnight prayers. Brindle whines softly beside your leg. You stare between them both. Brother Edric looks as though the world beneath his feet has cracked open. No one can survive down here, he whispers. Elswith's sad smile never fades. Not everyone did. The sealed stone arch behind her suddenly echoes with another sound from deep below the keep. Laughter. Dozens of voices this time. Faint. Waiting. The laughter beneath the sealed archway rolls softly through the chamber like distant water beneath ice. Not loud, not violent, somehow worse because of that. Dozens of faint overlapping voices drift upward from behind the stones while lantern light trembles across the damp walls. The old mortar around the arch glistens black with moisture. Iron nails hammered into the cracks long ago have rusted nearly through. Brother Edric stares at Elswith as though seeing both a ghost and a memory at once. You died, he whispers. Elswith lowers her eyes briefly. That is what the town needed. The bells overhead continue tolling midnight prayers far above the buried chamber. Slow, hollow, familiar now after so many days beneath their shadow. You glance toward the sealed arch again. The laughter continues faintly beyond it. Waiting. Brindle presses close against your leg with low, uneasy whines. Edric grips his lantern tighter. His hands shake visibly. I buried you myself. No, Elswith says softly. You buried an empty coffin. The monk closes his eyes. Snowmelt drips steadily from somewhere deeper in the tunnels. At last Edric speaks again. Why come back now? Elswith's smile fades slightly at that. Because they are forgetting the truth. The chamber grows still except for the distant laughter beyond the stones. You look between them. Someone should probably explain everything immediately. Reasonable request, honestly. Elswith steps slowly toward the old table, lantern light brushing her face. She appears neither young nor old exactly. Winter and years beneath hiding have thinned her, but something calm remains in her expression despite everything. When the relic arrived, she says quietly, people were already frightened. Fever had touched nearby villages. Crops failed early. Children starved during the previous winter. Brother Edric lowers his gaze. Lord Berenger held the feast to restore hope. And the relic. Elswith glances toward the tunnels leading back toward the chapel. The mirror frightened people first. You remember the draped silver frame upstairs. It showed things. No, she says. People imagined it did. The laughter beyond the arch swells slightly, then fades again. Elswith continues. One guest at the feast collapsed during dancing. Fever. By morning 2 more were sick. She looks toward Edric. Fear spread faster than illness. The monk nods weakly. Then came the stories, Elswith says. Whispers that smiling guests died first. Whispers that reflections moved strangely in candlelight. Brother Aldwyn wrote that, you say... Yes, Aldwyn believed fear itself had become contagious. The old chamber smells of damp stone and ancient wine casks long rotted away. Above your heads, roots twist through cracked ceilings like dark fingers. Edric finally speaks. The council needed control. Elswith looks at him sadly. So they outlawed joy. Silence settles heavily afterward. No one can quite agree whether terrible laws begin from cruelty or simply frightened people desperate to survive one more winter. You glance toward the sealed arch. And the laughter. At this, both of them grow quiet. Not a promising sign. Elswith walks slowly toward the stone barrier. Her bare feet leave faint wet prints across the dusty floor. After the deaths, she says softly, people hid below the keep during panic nights. Families, servants, children. The distant laughter drifts through the stones again. You hear echoes, she says. Old tunnels carry sound strangely beneath the hill. Brother Edric finally lifts his eyes. We sealed the passage because people began disappearing down there. Elswith turns back sharply. No, people fled. The monk's face tightens with old guilt. They were afraid. They were hunted, she replies. The word hangs cold in the chamber. You feel suddenly very tired. Not physically. Soul tired. The sort produced by discovering an entire town built generations of fear atop grief and rumour, until nobody remembers which part began the damage. Brindle wanders slowly toward Elswith, then, sniffing cautiously. She kneels to scratch behind his ears. The dog immediately wags his tail with complete loyalty. Traitor once again. Yet watching the animal greet her without fear changes something in the room. The tension eases fractionally. Elswith smiles properly then. Gentle, human, not cursed at all. Brother Edric stares at her expression with visible sorrow. We taught children to fear that face, he whispers. Yes. The bells above fade slowly into silence. Far away through the tunnels you hear faint movement now. Voices. Searchers, perhaps. Lantern-bearing reeves. The town still hunting shadows beneath its own foundations. Elswith rises. They cannot find me here. They already think something walks below the keep, you say. Something does. You glance nervously toward the sealed arch again. The laughter has nearly faded now into little more than shifting echoes. Brother Edric sinks slowly onto one of the broken casks as though decades have suddenly landed upon his shoulders all at once. I remember the children, he says quietly. During the first winter after the ban, they stopped playing in the square. Elswith's expression softens painfully. We survived, she says, but no one lived normally afterward. The monk laughs once then. A tiny sound. Dry. Broken. Yet unmistakably laughter. He freezes immediately after making it. So do you. The chamber waits. Nothing happens. No curse descends. No shadows move. Only dripping water and distant wind through cracks in stone. Brother Edric slowly lifts one trembling hand to his mouth. And then, for the first time in perhaps 30 years, the old monk begins quietly weeping. Not from terror, from relief. Elswith kneels beside him carefully. You were trying to protect them, she says. We buried ourselves instead. The words echo softly through the chamber. Above, footsteps grow louder through the tunnels now. Lantern light flickers faintly around distant corners. Searchers approaching. Elswith stands again. You should go. What about you, you ask? She looks toward the sealed arch one final time. I stayed because someone needed to remember before the fear twisted completely into legend. The approaching voices draw nearer. Brother Edric, down this passage. The monk wipes his eyes roughly beneath his sleeves and rises shakily. They must hear the truth. Will they? Elswith asks gently. Neither of you answers, because honestly, after 30 years of fear, rituals, mirrors, bells, bans, and silent winters, truth may no longer feel safer than the story. Brindle presses against Elswith's leg once more before trotting back toward you reluctantly. The old monk grips his lantern. Then, with visible effort, he does something that seems almost impossible inside this buried chamber beneath the keep. He smiles. Small, tired, human. Nothing happens. Only the distant bells above the sleeping town, the soft crackle of lantern flame, and snow falling somewhere beyond layers of ancient stone. And slowly, very slowly, Brother Edric begins walking back toward the surface to tell the town what it forgot long ago. You climb from the tunnels slowly beside Brother Edric while lantern light sways across the damp stone walls. Behind you, the buried chamber beneath the keep fades into darkness once more. Elswith remains there among the old casks and sealed arches, not as a ghost or monster, but as a quiet keeper of memory beneath a town that spent 3 decades fearing its own reflection. Brindle trots ahead up the spiral stairs with renewed optimism, pausing every few moments to ensure nobody has accidentally died from excessive emotional growth. The old monk climbs carefully beside you. His breathing sounds heavier now, yet something about him has changed beneath the weariness. His shoulders no longer seem pulled inward by invisible chains. Above, the chapel waits in candlelit silence. When you emerge through the hidden stair, dawn has already begun brushing pale grey against the horn-paned windows. Sometime during the long hours underground, night surrendered quietly to morning. The silver mirror still stands beside the altar beneath its dark covering. Brother Edric stops before it. For a moment neither of you speaks. Then, slowly, the monk reaches forward and removes the cloth. The mirror beneath gleams softly in the candlelight. Only a mirror, silver tarnished slightly with age. Tiny scratches around the frame. Beeswax drippings hardened near the base. Nothing supernatural reveals itself inside its reflection. Only the chapel, the candles, the tired monk beside you, and Brindle sitting proudly like a saint of stolen sausages. Edric studies his own face a long while. I feared this object for half my life, he murmurs. You feared what people believed about it. Yes. Outside, the first monastery bells of morning begin sounding across the snowy town. Slower now, gentle, familiar. The monk covers the mirror again, though more from habit than terror. Soon afterward, the Reeves arrive. Lanterns still burn in their hands, though dawn brightens steadily beyond the chapel doors. Garin enters first, snow clinging to his boots and beard. Behind him come Odo, the younger watchman, Marta wrapped in 2 shawls, and several others from the square. Everyone looks exhausted. Nobody notices at first that Brother Edric is smiling faintly. Then Marta does. The innkeeper stops walking entirely. The younger watchman nearly drops his lantern. Odo stares as though witnessing the moon descend into the chapel carrying tax forms. Silence spreads. Brother Edric looks at them all quietly. At some point, he says softly, we became more frightened of joy than sorrow. No thunder crashes. No shadows emerge from beneath the floor. Only morning light growing slowly brighter through the chapel windows. Garin lowers his spear first. The old guard studies Edric's face for several long seconds. Then, carefully, almost awkwardly, he smiles too. Small, Uneven, as though rediscovering a language forgotten since childhood. Marta immediately begins crying. That seems to break the spell entirely. Not chaos, nothing dramatic. Medieval people remain too tired for dramatic revolutions before breakfast. But something loosens in the room, shoulders lower, breathing changes. Fear no longer grips every silence quite so tightly. The younger watchman lets out one startled laugh before covering his mouth automatically. Nobody scolds him. Odo rubs both hands across his ink-stained face. Well, he mutters weakly, this is going to make record-keeping complicated. Honestly, probably true. The chapel slowly fills as news spreads through the town faster than bells ever could. Bakers arrive still dusted with flour. Fishermen smelling of river water crowd near the doors. Children peer cautiously from behind cloaks. People wait for disaster. None comes. Brother Edric tells them the truth as gently as he can. About the feast, the sickness, the fear, the years spent feeding superstition until it hardened into law. No one can quite agree afterward which part hurts most, the deaths themselves, or the realization that generations grew up afraid of smiling because frightened people long ago could not bear uncertainty. Some townsfolk resist immediately. Fear does not leave quickly after 30 winters. A reeve insists the ban kept order. An old woman claims the hollow man still walks beneath the keep. A fishmonger refuses to uncover his windows until spring. But others begin remembering things. Songs, games, dances, little ordinary joys buried beneath habit and caution. By midday the market square fills again beneath weak winter sunlight. Snow melts slowly from the rooftops. Merchants reopen their stalls. Smoke drifts warmly from chimneys. And everywhere, small uncertain smiles begin appearing like timid animals emerging after a long storm. A baker grins at burnt loaves. A child laughs when Brindle steals half a pie cooling beside a window. Even the mule from yesterday bites another apple and causes visible amusement among 3 separate witnesses. Civilization survives somehow. You walk through the square quietly while bells ring overhead. The decree still hangs beside the fountain, for the safety of all souls. Below it, someone has scratched new words into the frost-covered wood. Remember the fear, not the silence. No one admits writing it. Probably wise. Corin the mask-maker burns several old festival masks in a brazier near his stall. Not angrily, reverently almost. Painted smiles curl black beneath the flames while smoke drifts upward into the pale afternoon sky. Nearby, Odo already copies revised town notices with furious determination. Do you realize, he complains, how much parchment 30 years of unnecessary laws produced? An impressive amount. An insulting amount. Brindle naps beneath his table, completely unconcerned with historical transformation. Toward evening, you climb the hill road toward the outer gate. Snow crunches softly beneath your boots. Behind you, the town glows gold with candlelight preparing for another winter night. But the sound drifting upward now feels different. Warmer! Not loud, not reckless. Just human. Somewhere in the square, someone begins singing while unloading barrels. A child laughs openly nearby, and nobody rushes to stop either sound. At the gatehouse, Garin waits beside the open arch. "You're leaving early," he says. You seem busy rediscovering emotional expression. The old guard snorts. An actual snort. Progress. Cold evening wind moves through the gate chains while river mist gathers beyond the walls. Garin looks back once toward the town below. I'd forgotten, he admits quietly, how strange smiling feels. You'll relearn. Probably. There is that word one last time. He clasps your forearm firmly before stepping aside. You leave the town at dusk beneath pale winter clouds streaked silver by the fading sun. Behind you the bells continue ringing across the valley, softer now with distance. The road stretches onward between frozen fields and sleeping trees. Smoke rises gently from distant farmhouses. Somewhere far away, dogs bark beside unseen fires. And gradually, as night deepens around the quiet medieval world, everything begins slowing once more. The road, the wind, your thoughts. You remember warm candlelight trembling inside the chapel, the smell of beeswax and wood smoke, snow falling softly through the market square, the old monk smiling at last after carrying fear far too long. You remember Brindle asleep beside the hearth with twitching paws and stolen breadcrumbs scattered through his fur. You remember how heavy silence can become when people mistake it for safety, and how gentle even the smallest human warmth feels after a very long winter. Now the town behind you settles into evening beneath drifting smoke and monastery bells, while windows glow softly one by one against the growing dark. And somewhere inside those stone walls people sit closer to their hearths than before, speaking quietly, perhaps smiling a little without fear for the first time in many years. The river keeps moving beside the road. The snow keeps falling lightly through the trees. And the medieval world, with all its cold nights and candlelit rooms and tired wandering souls, slowly softens around you into stillness, into warmth, into sleep.